The Persian War, from the Histories by Herodotus. In the middle of the 6th century BC, Cyrus, first of the great Persian warrior kings, set out to extend the boundaries of his territory. Media, Lydia, the Ionian colonies along the eastern shore of the Aegean and Babylon, all these fell to Cyrus's armies. His son Cambyses extended the Persian Empire yet further, conquering Cyprus, Egypt, Syria, and Phoenicia. Cambyses was succeeded by his cousin Darius, who pushed the borders of his empire eastward to the river Indus and launched the first expedition into Europe. Proudly he boasted, "I am the great king, king of kings, king of this great earth far and wide." In 499, the Ionian Greeks revolted against their Persian masters, and thus began the great war between the Persians and the Greeks. Athens undertook to help the Ionian rebels, and even after the suppression of the revolt, Darius continued to resent the power and influence of Athens. Thus, in 492, he sent Mardonius against the Greeks, but with little success. Still, Darius would not give up and planned a further and even more ambitious expedition. Athens was the real prize he sought, but he would begin by taking Naxos in the Aegean, and so work his way towards Athens itself. So Darius pursued his own design from day to day, exhorted to remember the Athenians. Moreover, it pleased him well to have a pretext for carrying war into Greece, that so he might reduce all those who had refused to give him tribute. As for Mardonius, since his expedition had succeeded so ill, Darius took the command of the troops from him and appointed other generals in his stead, who were to lead the host against Eretria and Athens, to wit Datis, who was by descent a Mede, and Artaphernes, the son of Artaphernes, his own nephew. These men received orders to carry Athens and Eretria away captive, and to bring the prisoners into his presence. So the new commanders took their departure from the court and went down to Cilicia, to the Elean plain, having with them a numerous and well-appointed land army. Encamping here, they were joined by the sea force which had been required of the several states, and at the same time by the horse transports which Darius had the year before commanded his tributaries to make ready. Aboard these the horses were embarked, and the troops were received by the ships of war. After which the whole fleet, amounting in all to 600 triremes, made sail for Ionia. Thence, instead of proceeding with a straight course along the shore to the Hellespont and to Thrace, they loosed from Samos and voyaged across the Icarian Sea, through the midst of the islands. The Persian fleet now drew near and anchored at Tamanae, Coriae, and Aegylia, 3 places in the territory of Eretria. Once masters of these posts, they proceeded forthwith to disembark their horses and made ready to attack the enemy. But the Eretrians were not minded to sally forth and offer battle. Their only care, after it had been resolved not to quit the city, was, if possible, to defend their walls. And now the fortress was assaulted in good earnest, and for 6 days there fell on both sides vast numbers. But on the 7th day, Euphorbus, the son of Alcimachus, and Philagris, the son of Cineas, who were both citizens of good repute, betrayed the place to the Persians. These were no sooner entered within the walls than they plundered and burnt all the temples that there were in the town, in revenge for the burning of their own temples at Sardis. Moreover, they did according to the orders of Darius, and carried away captive all the inhabitants. The Persians, having thus brought Eretria into subjection, after waiting a few days, made sail for Attica, greatly straitening the Athenians as they approached, and thinking to deal with them as they had dealt with the people of Eretria. And because there was no place in all Attica so convenient for their horse as Marathon, and it lay moreover quite close to Eretria, therefore Hippias, the son of Pisistratus, conducted them thither. When intelligence of this reached the Athenians, they likewise marched their troops to Marathon, and there stood on the defensive, having at their head 10 generals, of whom one was Miltiades. But first, before they left the city, the generals sent off to Sparta a herald, one Pheidippides, who was by birth an Athenian and by profession and practice a trained runner. This man, according to the account which he gave to the Athenians on his return, when he was near Mount Parthenium above Tegea, fell in with the god Pan, who called him by his name and bade him ask the Athenians wherefore they neglected him so entirely when he was kindly disposed towards them, and had often helped them in times past, and would do so again in time to come. The Athenians, entirely believing in the truth of this report, as soon as their affairs were once more in good order, set up a temple to Pan under the Acropolis, and in return for the message which I have recorded, established in his honour yearly sacrifices and a torch race. On the occasion of which we speak, when Pheidippides was sent by the Athenian generals, and according to his own account saw Pan on his journey, he reached Sparta on the very next day after quitting the city of Athens. Upon his arrival, he went before the rulers and said to them, Men of Sparta, the Athenians beseech you to hasten to their aid, and not allow that state, which is the most ancient in all Greece, to be enslaved by the barbarians. Eretria, look you, is already carried away captive, and Greece weakened by the loss of no mean city. Thus did Pheidippides deliver the message committed to him, and the Spartans wished to help the Athenians, but were unable to give them any present succour, as they did not like to break their established law. It was then the 9th day of the first decade, and they could not march out of Sparta on the 9th, when the moon had not reached the full. So they waited for the full of the moon. The Athenians were drawn up in order of battle in a sacred close belonging to Heracles, when they were joined by the Plataeans, who came in full force to their aid. Some time before, the Plataeans had put themselves under the rule of the Athenians, and these last had already undertaken many labours on their behalf. The Athenian generals were divided in their opinions, and some advised not to risk a battle, because they were too few to engage such a host as that of the Medes, while others were for fighting at once. And amongst these last was Miltiades. He therefore, seeing that opinions were thus divided, and that the less worthy counsel appeared likely to prevail, resolved to go to the polemarch and have a conference with him. For the man on whom the lot fell to be polemarch at Athens was entitled to give his vote with the 10 generals, since anciently the Athenians allowed him an equal right of voting with them. The polemarch at this juncture was Callimachus of Aphidnae. To him therefore Miltiades went and said, We generals are 10 in number, and our votes are divided. Half of us wish to engage, half to avoid a combat. Now, if we do not fight, I look to see a great disturbance at Athens, which will shake men's resolutions, and then I fear they will submit themselves. But if we fight the battle before any unsoundness show itself among our citizens, let the gods but give us fair play, and we are well able to overcome the enemy. On thee, therefore, we depend in this matter, which lies wholly in thine own power. Thou hast only to add thy vote to my side, and thy country will be free, and not free only, but the first state in Greece. Or if thou preferest to give thy vote to them who would decline the combat, then the reverse will follow. Miltiades by these words gained Callimachus, and the addition of the polemarch's vote caused the decision to be in favour of fighting. Hereupon, all those generals who had been desirous of hazarding a battle when their turn came to command the army gave up their right to Miltiades. He, however, though he accepted their offers, nevertheless waited, and would not fight until his own day of command arrived in due course. Then at length, when his own turn was come, the Athenian battle was set in array, and this was the order of it. Callimachus the polemarch led the right wing, for it was at that time a rule with the Athenians to give the right wing to the polemarch. After this followed the tribes, according as they were numbered in an unbroken line, while last of all came the Plataeans, forming the left wing. And ever since that day it has been the custom with the Athenians, in the sacrifices and assemblies held each 5th year at Athens, for the Athenian herald to implore the blessing of the gods on the Plataeans conjointly with the Athenians. Now as they marshalled the host upon the field of Marathon, in order that the Athenian front might be equal length with the Median, the ranks of the centre were diminished, and it became the weakest part of the line, while the wings were both made strong with the depth of many ranks. So when the battle was set in array, and the victims showed themselves favourable, instantly the Athenians, so soon as they were let go, charged the barbarians at a run. Now the distance between the two armies was little short of 8 furlongs. The Persians, therefore, when they saw the Greeks coming on at speed, made ready to receive them, although it seemed to them that the Athenians were bereft of their senses and bent upon their own destruction. For they saw a mere handful of men coming on at a run without either horsemen or archers. Such was the opinion of the barbarians. But the Athenians in close array fell upon them, and fought in a manner worthy of being recorded. They were the first of the Greeks, so far as I know, who introduced the custom of charging the enemy at a run, and they were likewise the first who dared to look upon the Median garb and to face men clad in that fashion. Until this time, the very name of the Medes had been a terror to the Greeks to hear. The two armies fought together on the plain of Marathon for a length of time, and in the mid-battle, where the Persians themselves and the Sacae had their place, the barbarians were victorious, and broke and pursued the Greeks into the inner country. But on the two wings, the Athenians and the Plataeans defeated the enemy. Having so done, they suffered the routed barbarians to fly at their ease, and joining the two wings in one, fell upon those who had broken their own centre, and fought and conquered them. These likewise fled, and now the Athenians hung upon the runaways and cut them down, chasing them all the way to the shore, on reaching which they laid hold of the ships and called aloud for fire. It was in the struggle here that Callimachus the polemarch, after greatly distinguishing himself, lost his life. Stesilaus too, the son of Thrasilaus, one of the generals, was slain, and Cynegerus, the son of Euphorion, having seized on a vessel of the enemies by the ornament at the stern, had his hand cut off by the blow of an axe, and so perished, as likewise did many other Athenians of note and name. Nevertheless, the Athenians secured in this way 7 of the vessels, while with the remainder the barbarians pushed off, and taking aboard their Erythraean prisoners from the island where they had left them, doubled Cape Sunium, hoping to reach Athens before the return of the Athenians. The Persians accordingly sailed round Sunium, but the Athenians, with all possible speed, marched away to the defence of their city, and succeeded in reaching Athens before the appearance of the barbarians. And as their camp at Marathon had been pitched in the precinct of Heracles, so now they encamped in another precinct of the same god at Cynosarges. The barbarian fleet arrived, and lay to off Phalerum, which was at that time the haven of Athens. But after resting a while upon their oars, they departed and sailed away to Asia. There fell in this battle of Marathon, on the side of the barbarians, about 6,400 men. On that of the Athenians, 192. Such was the number of the slain on the one side and the other. A strange prodigy likewise happened at this fight. Epizelus, the son of Cuphagoras, an Athenian, was in the thick of the fray, and behaving himself as a brave man should, when suddenly he was stricken with blindness, without blow of sword or dart, and this blindness continued thenceforth during the whole of his after life. The following is the account which he himself, as I have heard, gave of the matter. He said that a gigantic warrior with a huge beard, which shaded all his shield, stood over against him, but the ghostly semblance passed him by and slew the man at his side. Such, as I understand, was the tale which Epizelus told. After the full of the moon, 2,000 Lacedaemonians came to Athens. So eager had they been to arrive in time that they took but 3 days to reach Attica from Sparta. They came, however, too late for the battle, yet, as they had a longing to behold the Medes, they continued their march to Marathon, and there viewed the slain. Then, after giving the Athenians all praise for their achievement, they departed and returned home. Now, when tidings of the battle that had been fought at Marathon reached the ears of King Darius, his anger against the Athenians, which had been already roused by their attack upon Sardis, waxed still fiercer, and he became more than ever eager to lead an army against Greece. Instantly, he sent off messengers to make proclamation through the several states that fresh levies were to be raised, and these at an increased rate, while ships, horses, provisions, and transports were likewise to be furnished. So the men published his commands, and now all Asia was in commotion for 3 years, while everywhere, as Greece was to be attacked, the best and bravest were enrolled for the service, and had to make their preparations accordingly. After this, in the 4th year, the Egyptians, whom Cambyses had enslaved, revolted against the Persians, whereupon Darius was more hot for war than ever, and earnestly desired to march an army against both adversaries. Now, as he was about to lead forth his levies against Egypt and Athens, a fierce contention for the sovereign power arose amongst his sons, since the law of the Persians was that a king must not go out with his army until he has appointed one to succeed him upon the throne. Darius, before he obtained the kingdom, had had 3 sons born to him from his former wife, who was a daughter of Gobryas, while since he began to reign, Etossa, the daughter of Cyrus, had borne him 4. Artabazanes was the eldest of the first family, and Xerxes of the second. These 2, therefore, being the sons of different mothers, were now at variance. Artabazanes claimed the crown as the eldest of all the children, because it was an established custom all over the world for the eldest to have the preeminence, while Xerxes, on the other hand, urged that he was sprung from Etossa, the daughter of Cyrus, and that it was Cyrus who had won the Persians their freedom. Before Darius had pronounced on the matter, it happened that Demaratus, the son of Ariston, who had been deprived of his crown at Sparta and had afterwards of his own accord gone into banishment, arrived in Susa, and there heard of the quarrel of the princes. Hereupon, as report says, he went to Xerxes and advised him, in addition to all that he had urged before, to plead that at the time when he was born, Darius was already king, and bore rule over the Persians. But when Artabazanes came into the world, he was a mere private person. It would therefore be neither right nor seemly that the crown should go to another in preference to himself. For at Sparta, said Demaratus by way of suggestion, the law is that if a king has sons before he comes to the throne, and another son is born to him afterwards, the child so born is heir to his father's kingdom. Xerxes followed this counsel, and Darius, persuaded that he had justice on his side, appointed him his successor. For my own part, I believe that even without this the crown would have gone to Xerxes, for Etossa was all-powerful. Darius, when he had thus appointed Xerxes his heir, was minded to lead forth his armies, but he was prevented by death while his preparations were still proceeding. He died in the year following the revolt of Egypt and the matters here related, after having reigned in all 36 years, leaving the revolted Egyptians and the Athenians alike unpunished. At his death, the kingdom passed to his son Xerxes. Now Xerxes, on first mounting the throne, was coldly disposed towards the Grecian war, and made it his business to collect an army against Egypt. But Mardonius, the son of Gobryas, who was at the court, and had more influence with him than any of the other Persians, being his own cousin, the child of a sister of Darius, plied him with discourses like the following. Master, it is not fitting that they of Athens escape scot-free, after doing the Persians such great injury. Complete the work which thou hast now in hand, and then, when the pride of Egypt is brought low, lead an army against Athens. So shalt thou thyself have good report among men, and others shall fear hereafter to attack thy country. Thus far, it was of vengeance that he spoke. But sometimes he would vary the theme, and observe by the way that Europe was a wondrous beautiful region, rich in all kinds of cultivated trees, and the soil excellent. No one save the king was worthy to own such a land. All this he said because he longed for adventures, and hoped to become satrap of Greece under the king. And after a while he had his way and persuaded Xerxes to do according to his desires. Other things, however, occurring about the same time, helped his persuasions. For in the first place, it chanced that messengers arrived from Thessaly, sent by the Eleudi, Thessalian kings, to invite Xerxes into Greece and to promise him all the assistance which it was in their power to give. And further, the Pisistratidi, who had come up to Susa, held the same language as the Eleudi, and worked upon him even more than they, by means of Onomachritus of Athens as an oracle-monger. 'Twas fated, he told Xerxes, that a Persian should bridge the Hellespont and march an army from Asia into Greece. While Onomachritus thus plied Xerxes with his oracles, the Pisistratidi and Eleudi did not cease to press on him their advice, till at last the king yielded and agreed to lead forth an expedition. First, however, in the year following the death of Darius, he marched against those who had revolted from him, and having reduced them and laid all Egypt under a far harder yoke than even his father had put upon it, he gave the government to Achaemenes, who was his own brother and son to Darius. Reckoning from the recovery of Egypt, Xerxes spent 4 full years in collecting his host and making ready all things that were needful for his soldiers. It was not till the close of the 5th year that he set forth on his march, accompanied by a mighty multitude. For of all the armaments whereof any mention has reached us, this was by far the greatest, insomuch that no other expedition compared to this seems of any account. For was there a nation in all Asia which Xerxes did not bring with him against Greece? Or was there a river, except those of unusual size, which sufficed for his troops to drink? One nation furnished ships, another was arrayed among the foot soldiers, a third had to supply horses, a fourth transports for the horse and men likewise for the transport service, a fifth ships of war towards the bridges, a sixth ships and provisions. And in the first place, because the former fleet had met with so great a disaster about Athos, preparations were made by the space of about 3 years in that quarter. A fleet of triremes lay at Elaeus in the Chersonese, and from this station detachments were sent by the various nations whereof the army was composed, which relieved one another at intervals and worked at a trench beneath the lash of taskmasters, while the people dwelling about Athos bore likewise a part in the labour. 2 Persians, Bubares the son of Megabatzus and Artachaes the son of Arteus, superintended the undertaking. Athos is a great and famous mountain, inhabited by men and stretching far out into the sea. Where the mountain ends towards the mainland, it forms a peninsula, and in this place there is a neck of land about 12 furlongs across, the whole extent whereof, from the sea of the Acanthians to that over against Torone, is a level plain broken only by a few low hills. Here upon this isthmus, where Athos ends, is Sarne, a Greek city. Inside of Sarne, and upon Athos itself, are a number of towns, which Xerxes was now employed in disjoining from the continent. It seems to me, when I consider this work, that Xerxes, in making it, was actuated by a feeling of pride, wishing to display the extent of his power, and to leave a memorial behind him to posterity. For notwithstanding that it was open to him with no trouble at all to have had his ships drawn across the isthmus, yet he issued orders that a canal should be made through which the sea might flow, and that it should be of such a width as would allow of 2 triremes passing through abreast with the oars in action. He likewise gave to the same persons who were set over the digging of the trench the task of making a bridge across the river Strymon. While these things were in progress, he was having cables prepared for his bridges, some of papyrus and some of white flax, a business which he entrusted to the Phoenicians and the Egyptians. He likewise laid up stores of provisions in divers places to save the army and the beasts of burden from suffering want upon their march into Greece. He inquired carefully about all the sites, and had the stores laid up in such as were most convenient, causing them to be brought across from various parts of Asia, and in various ways, some in transports and others in merchantmen. During the time that all these labours were in progress, The land army which had been collected was marching with Xerxes towards Sardis, having started from Critala in Cappadocia. At this spot, all the host which was about to accompany the king in his passage across the continent had been bidden to assemble. And here I have not in my power to mention which of the satraps was adjudged to have brought his troops in the most gallant array, and on that account rewarded by the king according to his promise. For I do not know whether this matter ever came to a judgment. But it is certain that the host of Xerxes, after crossing the river Halys, marched through Phrygia till it reached the city of Selene. Now there lived in this city a certain Pythias, son of Attis, a Lydian. This man entertained Xerxes and his whole army in a most magnificent fashion, offering at the same time to give him a sum of money for the war. Xerxes, upon the mention of money, turned to the Persians who stood by and asked of them, "Who is this Pythias, and what wealth has he that he should venture on such an offer as this?" They answered him, "This is the man, O king, who gave thy father Darius the golden plane tree, and likewise the golden vine, and he is still the wealthiest man we know of in all the world, excepting thee." Xerxes marvelled at these last words, and now addressing Pythias with his own lips, he asked him what the amount of his wealth really was. Pythias answered as follows, "O king, I will not hide this matter from thee, nor make pretence that I do not know how rich I am, but as I know perfectly, I will declare all fully before thee. For when thy journey was noised abroad, and I heard thou wert coming down to the Grecian coast, straightway, as I wished to give thee a sum of money for the war, I made count of my stores, and found them to be 2,000 talents of silver, and of gold 4 millions of Daric status, wanting 7,000. All this I willingly make over to thee as a gift, and when it is gone, my slaves and my estates in land will be wealth enough for my wants." This speech charmed Xerxes, and he replied, "Dear Lydian, since I left Persia, there is no man but thou who has either desired to entertain my army, or come forward of his own free will to offer me a sum of money for the war. Thou hast done both the one and the other, feasting my troops magnificently, and now making offer of a right noble sum. In return, this is what I will bestow on thee. Thou shalt be my sworn friend from this day, and the 7,000 staters which are wanting to make up thy 4 millions I will supply, so that the full tale may be no longer lacking, and that thou mayest owe the completion of the round sum to me. Continue to enjoy all that thou hast acquired hitherto, and be sure to remain ever such as thou art now. If thou dost, thou wilt not repent of it so long as thy life endures." When Xerxes had so spoken and made good his promises to Pythias, he pressed forward upon his march, and passing an hour a Phrygian city, and a lake from which salt is gathered, he came to Colossae, a Phrygian city of great size, situated at a spot where the river Lycus plunges into a chasm and disappears. This river, after running underground a distance of about 5 furlongs, reappears once more and empties itself into the meander. Leaving Colossae, the army approached the borders of Phrygia, where it abuts on Lydia, and here they came to a city called Sidria, where was a pillar set up by Croesus, having an inscription on it showing the boundaries of the two countries. The day after, Xerxes entered the Lydian capital. Here his first care was to send off heralds into Greece, who were to make a demand for tribute, and to require that preparation should be made everywhere to feast the king. To Athens, indeed, and to Sparta he sent no such demand, but these cities accepted, his messengers went everywhere. Now the reason why he sent for tribute to states which had already refused was this. He thought that although they had refused when Darius made the demand, they would now be too frightened to venture to say him nay. So he sent his heralds, wishing to know for certain how it would be. Xerxes after this made preparations to advance to Abydos, where the bridge across the Hellespont from Asia to Europe was lately finished. Midway between Sestos and Madytus, in the Hellespontine Chersonese, and right over against Abydos, there is a rocky tongue of land which runs out for some distance into the sea. Towards this tongue of land, then, the men to whom the business was assigned carried out a double bridge from Abydos. And while the Phoenicians constructed one line with cables of white flax, the Egyptians in the other used ropes made of papyrus. Now it is 7 furlongs across from Abydos to the opposite coast. When, therefore, the channel had been bridged successfully, it happened that a great storm arising broke the whole work to pieces and destroyed all that had been done. So when Xerxes heard of it, he was full of wrath, and straightway gave orders that the Hellespont should receive 300 lashes, and that a pair of fetters should be cast into it. Nay, I have even heard it said that he bade the branders take their irons and therewith brand the Hellespont. It is certain that he commanded those who scourged the waters to utter, as they lashed them, these barbarian and wicked words: "Thou bitter water, thy Lord lays on thee this punishment because thou hast wronged him without a cause, having suffered no evil at his hands. Verily, King Xerxes will cross thee, whether thou wilt or no. Well dost thou deserve that no man should honour thee with sacrifice, for thou art of a truth a treacherous and unsavoury river." While the sea was thus punished by his orders, he likewise commanded that the overseers of the work should lose their heads. Then they, whose business it was, executed the unpleasing task laid upon them, and other master builders were set over the work, who accomplished it in the way which I will now describe. They joined together triremes and galleys, 360 to support the bridge on the side of the Black Sea, and 314 to sustain the other. And these they placed at right angles to the sea, and in the direction of the current of the Hellespont, relieving by these means the tension of the shore cables. Having joined the vessels, they moored them with anchors of unusual size, that the vessels of the bridge towards the Black Sea might resist the winds which blow from within the straits, and that those of the more western bridge, facing the Aegean, might withstand the winds which set in from the south and from the southeast. A gap was left in the galleys in no fewer than 3 places, to afford a passage for such light craft as chose to enter or leave the Black Sea. When all this was done, they made the cables taut from the shore by help of wooden capstans. This time, however, instead of using the 2 materials separately, they assigned to each bridge 6 cables, 2 of which were of white flax, while 4 were of papyrus. Both cables were of the same size and quality, but the flaxen were the heavier, weighing not less than a talent a cubit. When the bridge across the channel was thus complete, trunks of trees were sawn into planks, which were cut to the width of the bridge, and these were laid side by side upon the tightened cables, and then fastened on the top. This done, brushwood was brought and arranged upon the planks, after which earth was heaped upon the brushwood, and the whole trodden down into a solid mass. Lastly, a bulwark was set up on either side of this causeway, of such a height as to prevent the sumpter beasts and the horses from seeing over it and taking fright at the water. And now, when all was prepared, the bridges and the works at Athos, the breakwaters about the mouths of the cuttings, which were made to hinder the surf from blocking up the entrances, and the cutting itself. And when the news came to Xerxes that this last was completely finished, then at length the host, having first wintered at Sardis, began its march towards Abydos, fully equipped on the first approach of spring. At the moment of departure, the sun suddenly quitted his seat in the heavens and disappeared, though there were no clouds in sight, but the sky was clear and serene. Day was thus turned into night, whereupon Xerxes, who saw and remarked the prodigy, was seized with alarm, and sending at once for the Magians, inquired of them the meaning of the portent. They replied, "God is foreshowing to the Greeks the destruction of their cities, for the sun foretells for them, and the moon for us." So Xerxes, thus instructed, proceeded on his way with great gladness of heart. The army had begun its march when Pythias the Lydian, affrighted at the heavenly portent and emboldened by his gifts, came to Xerxes and said, "Grant me, O Lord, a favour which is to thee a light matter, but to me of vast account." Then Xerxes, who looked for nothing less than such a prayer as Pythias in fact preferred, engaged to grant him whatever he wished, and commanded him to tell his wish freely. So Pythias, full of boldness, went on to say, "O my lord, thy servant has 5 sons, and it chances that all are called upon to join thee in this march against Greece. I beseech thee, have compassion upon my years, and let one of my sons, the eldest, remain behind to be my prop and stay, and the guardian of my wealth. Take with thee the other 4, and when thou hast done all that is in thy heart, mayest thou come back in safety." But Xerxes was greatly angered, and replied to him, "Thou wretch, darest thou speak to me of thy son, when I am myself on the march against Greece, with sons and brothers and kinsfolk and friends? Thou, who art my bondslave, and art in duty bound to follow me with all thy household, not excepting thy wife. Know that man's spirit dwelleth in his ears, and when it hears good things, straightway it fills all his body with delight. But no sooner does it hear the contrary than it heaves and swells with passion. As when thou didst good deeds and madest good offers to me, thou wert not able to boast of having outdone the king in bountifulness, so now when thou art changed and grown impudent, thou shalt not receive all thy deserts, but less. For thou thyself and 4 of thy 5 sons, the entertainment which I had of thee shall gain protection. But as for him to whom thou clingest above the rest, the forfeit of his life shall be thy punishment." Having thus spoken, forthwith he commanded those to whom such tasks were assigned to seek out the eldest of the sons of Pythias, and having cut his body asunder, to place the 2 halves, one on the right, the other on the left, of the great road, so that the army might march out between them. Then the king's orders were obeyed, and the army marched out between the 2 halves of the carcass. First of all went the baggage-bearers and the sumpter beasts, and then a vast crowd of many nations mingled together without any intervals, amounting to more than 1/2 of the army. After these troops an empty space was left, to separate between them and the king. In front of the king went first 1,000 horsemen, picked men of the Persian nation, then spearmen 1,000, likewise chosen troops with their spearheads pointing towards the ground. Next 10 of the sacred horses called Nisaeans, all daintily caparisoned. After the 10 sacred horses came the holy chariot of Zeus, drawn by 8 milk-white steeds, with the charioteer on foot behind them holding the reins, for no mortal is ever allowed to mount into the car. Next to this came Xerxes himself, riding in a chariot drawn by Nisaean horses, with his charioteer Patiramphes, the son of Otanes, a Persian, standing by his side. Thus rode forth Xerxes from Sardis. But he was accustomed every now and then, when the fancy took him, to alight from his chariot and travel in a litter. Immediately behind the king there followed a body of 1,000 spearmen, the noblest and bravest of the Persians, holding their lances in the usual manner. Then came 1,000 Persian horse, picked men, then 10,000, picked also after the rest, and serving on foot. Of these last 1,000 carried spears with golden pomegranates at their lower end instead of spikes. And these encircled the other 9,000, who bore on their spears pomegranates of silver. The spearmen too, who pointed their lances towards the ground, had golden pomegranates, and the 1,000 Persians who followed close after Xerxes had golden apples. Behind the 10,000 footmen came a body of Persian cavalry, likewise 10,000, after which there was again a void space for as much as 2 furlongs, and then the rest of the army followed in a confused crowd. On reaching the Scamander, which was the first stream of all that they had crossed since they left Sardis, whose water failed them, and did not suffice to satisfy the thirst of men and cattle, Xerxes ascended into the Pergamus of Priam, since he had a longing to behold the place. When he had seen everything, and inquired into all particulars, he made an offering of 1,000 oxen to the Trojan Athena, while the Magians poured libations to the heroes who were slain at Troy. The night after, a panic fell upon the camp, but in the morning they set off with daylight, and so reached Abydos. Arrived here, Xerxes wished to look upon all his host. So as there was a throne of white marble upon a hill near the city, which they of Abydos had prepared beforehand by the king's bidding for his especial use, Xerxes took his seat on it, and gazing thence upon the shore below, beheld at one view all his land forces and all his ships. While thus employed, he felt a desire to behold a sailing match among his ships, which accordingly took place and was won by the Phoenicians of Sidon, much to the joy of Xerxes, who was delighted alike with the race and with his army. And now, as he looked and saw the whole Hellespont covered with the vessels of his fleet, and all the shore and every plain about Abydos as full as possible of men, Xerxes congratulated himself on his good fortune. But after a little while he wept. Then Artabanus, the king's uncle, the same who at the first so freely spake his mind to the king, and advised him not to lead his army against Greece, when he heard that Xerxes was in tears, went to him and said, "How different, sire, is what thou art now doing from what thou didst a little while ago. Then thou didst congratulate thyself, and now behold, thou weepest." "There came upon me," replied he, "a sudden pity, when I thought of the shortness of man's life, and considered that of all this host, so numerous as it is, not one will be alive when 100 years are gone by." "And yet there are sadder things in life than that," returned the other. "Short as our time is, there is no man, whether it be here amongst this multitude or elsewhere, who is so happy as not to have felt the wish, I will not say once, but full many a time, that he were dead rather than alive. Calamities fall upon us, sicknesses vex and harass us, and make life, short though it be, to appear long. So death, through the wretchedness of our life, is a most sweet refuge to our race, and God, who gives us the tastes that we enjoy of pleasant times, is seen in his very gift to be envious." "True," said Xerxes, "human life is even such as thou hast painted it, O Artabanus. But for this very reason, let us turn our thoughts from it, and not dwell on what is so sad, when pleasant things are in hand. Tell me rather, if the vision which we saw had not appeared so plainly to thyself, wouldst thou have been still of the same mind as formerly, and have continued to dissuade me from warring against Greece, or wouldst thou at this time think differently? Come now, tell me this honestly." "O king," replied the other, "may the dream which have appeared to us have such issue as we both desire. For my own part, I am still full of fear, and have scarcely power to control myself when I consider all our dangers, and especially when I see that the two things which are of most consequence are alike opposed to thee." "Thou strange man," said Xerxes in reply, "what, I pray thee, are the two things thou speakest of? Does my land army seem to thee too small in number? And will the Greeks, thinkest thou, bring into the field a more numerous host? Or is it our fleet which thou deemest weaker than theirs? Or art thou fearful on both accounts? If in thy judgment we fall short in either respect, it were easy to bring together with all speed another armament." "O king," said Artabanus, "it is not possible that a man of understanding should find fault with the size of thy army or the number of thy ships. The more thou addest to these, the more hostile will these two things whereof I spake become. Those two things are the land and the sea. In all the wide sea there is not, I imagine, anywhere a harbour large enough to receive thy vessels in case a storm arise, and afford them a sure protection. And yet thou wilt want not one such harbour only, but many in succession along the entire coast by which thou art about to make thy advance. In default then of such harbours, it is well to bear in mind that chances rule men, and not men chances. Such is the first of the two dangers. And now I will speak to thee of the second. The land will also be thine enemy. For if no one resists thy advance, as thou proceedest further and further, insensibly allured onwards, for who is ever sated with success, thou wilt find it more and more hostile. I mean this, that should nothing else withstand thee, yet the mere distance, becoming greater as time goes on, will at last produce a famine. Methinks it is best for men, when they take counsel, to be timorous, imagine all possible calamities. But when the time for action comes, then to deal boldly. Whereto Xerxes answered, There is reason, O Artabanus, in everything which thou hast said. But I pray thee, fear not all things alike, nor count up every risk. For if in each matter that comes before us thou wilt look to all possible chances, never wilt thou achieve anything. Far better is it to have a stout heart always, and suffer one's share of evils, than to be ever fearing what may happen, and never incur a mischance. After Xerxes had thus spoken, and sent Artabanus away to return to Susa, he summoned before him all the Persians of most repute, and when they appeared, addressed them in these words. Persians, I have brought you together because I wish to exhort you to behave bravely and not to sully with disgrace the former achievements of the Persian people, which are very great and famous. Rather, let us one and all singly and jointly exert ourselves to the uttermost, for the matter wherein we are engaged concerns the commonweal. Strain every nerve, then, I beseech you, in this war. Brave warriors are the men we march against, if report says true, and such that if we conquer them, there is not a people in all the world which will venture thereafter to withstand our arms. And now let us offer prayers to the gods, who watch over the welfare of Persia, and then cross the channel. All that day the preparations for the passage continued, and on the morrow they burnt all kinds of spices upon the bridges, and strewed the way with myrtle boughs, while they waited anxiously for the sun, which they hoped to see as he rose. And now the sun appeared, and Xerxes took a golden goblet and poured from it a libation into the sea, praying the while with his face turned to the sun, that no misfortune might befall him such as to hinder his conquest of Europe, until he had penetrated to its uttermost boundaries. After he had prayed, he cast the golden cup into the Hellespont, and with it a golden bowl, and a Persian sword of the kind which they call Asinaces. I cannot say for certain whether it was an offering to the sun god that he threw these things into the deep, or whether he had repented of having scourged the Hellespont, and thought by his gifts to make amends to the sea for what he had done. When, however, his offerings were made, the army began to cross, and the foot soldiers with the horsemen passed over by one of the bridges, that, namely, which lay towards the Black Sea, while the sumpter beasts and the camp followers passed by the other, which looked on the Aegean. Foremost went the 10,000 Persians, all wearing garlands upon their heads, and after them a mixed multitude of many nations. These crossed upon the first day. On the next day the horsemen began the passage, and with them went the soldiers who carried their spears with a point downwards, garlanded, like the 10,000. Then came the sacred horses and the sacred chariot. Next Xerxes with his lancers and the 1,000 horse. Then the rest of the army. At the same time the ships sailed over to the opposite shore. As soon as Xerxes had reached the European side, he stood to contemplate his army as they crossed under the lash. And the crossing continued during 7 days and 7 nights, without rest or pause. So Xerxes marched forwards. The name Doriscus is given to a beach in a vast plain upon the coast of Thrace, through the middle of which flows the strong stream of the Hebrus. Here was the royal fort, which is likewise called Doriscus, where Darius had maintained a Persian garrison ever since the time when he attacked the Scythians. This place seemed to Xerxes a convenient spot for reviewing and numbering his soldiers, which things accordingly he proceeded to do. The sea captains who had brought the fleet to Doriscus were ordered to take the vessels to the beach adjoining, where Sale stands, a city of the Samothracians, and Zone, another city. Here then the captains were to bring their ships, and to haul them ashore for refitting, while Xerxes at Damascus was employed in numbering the soldiers. What the exact number of the troops of each nation was, I cannot say with certainty, for it is not mentioned by any one, but the whole land army together was found to amount to 1,700,000 men. The manner in which the numbering took place was the following. A body of 10,000 men was brought to a certain place, and the men were made to stand as close together as possible, after which a circle was drawn around them, and the men were let go. Then, where the circle had been, a fence was built about the height of a man's middle, and the enclosure was filled continually with fresh troops, till the whole army had in this way been numbered. When the numbering was over, the troops were drawn up according to their several nations. Now when the numbering and marshalling of the host was ended, Xerxes conceived a wish to go himself throughout the forces, and with his own eyes behold everything. Accordingly he traversed the ranks seated in his chariot, and going from nation to nation made manifold inquiries, while his scribes wrote down the answers, till at last he had passed from end to end of the whole land army, both the horsemen and likewise the foot. This done, he exchanged his chariot for a Sidonian galley, and seated beneath a golden awning, sailed along the prows of all his vessels, the vessels having now been hauled down and launched into the sea, while he made inquiries again, as he had done when he reviewed the land force, and caused the answers to be recorded by his scribes. The captains took their ships to the distance of about 400 feet from the shore, and there lay to, with their vessels in a single row, the prows facing the land, and with the fighting men upon the decks accoutred as if for war, while the king sailed along in the open space between the ships and the shore, and so reviewed the fleet. Now after Xerxes had sailed down the whole line and was gone ashore, he sent for Demaratus, the son of Ariston, who had accompanied him in his march upon Greece, and bespake him thus: Demaratus, it is my pleasure at this time to ask thee certain things which I wish to know. Thou art a Greek, and as I hear from the other Greeks with whom I converse, no less than from thine own lips, thou art a native of a city which is not the meanest or the weakest in their land. Tell me, therefore, what thinkest thou? Will the Greeks lift a hand against us? Mine own judgment is, that even if all the Greeks and all the barbarians of the West were gathered together in one place, they would not be able to abide my onset, not being really of one mind. But I would fain know what thou thinkest hereon. Thus Xerxes questioned, and the other replied in his turn, O king, is it thy will that I give thee a true answer, or dost thou wish for a pleasant one? And then the king bade him speak the plain truth, and promised him that he would not on that account hold him in less favour than heretofore. So Demaratus, when he heard the promise, spake as follows: O king, since thou biddest me at all risks speak the truth, and not say what will one day prove me to have lied to thee, thus I answer. Want has at all times been a fellow dweller with us in our land, while valour is an ally whom we have gained by dint of wisdom and strict laws. Her aid enables us to drive out want and escape thraldom. Brave are all the Greeks who dwell in any Dorian land. But what I am about to say does not concern all, but only the Lacedaemonians. First then, come what may, they will never accept thy terms, which would reduce Greece to slavery. And further, they are sure to join battle with thee, though all the rest of the Greeks should submit to thy will. As for their numbers, do not ask how many they are, that their resistance should be a possible thing. For if 1,000 of them should take the field, they will meet thee in battle, and so will any number, be it less than this, or be it more. Such was the answer of Demaratus, and Xerxes was not angry with him at all, but only laughed, and sent him away with words of kindness. After this interview, Xerxes started with his army, and marched upon Greece through Thrace. And on his way he forced all the nations through which he passed to take part in the expedition. For the whole country, as far as the frontiers of Thessaly, had been, as I have already shown, enslaved, and made tributary to the king by the conquests of Megabatzus and more lately of Mardonius. From the Strymon, the army proceeding westward came to a strip of shore, on which there stands the Grecian town of Argilus. This shore, and the whole tract above it, is called Bisaltia. Passing this and keeping on the left hand the Gulf of Pisidium, Xerxes crossed the Sicilian plain, as it is called, and passing by Stagirus, a Greek city, came to Acanthus. The inhabitants of these parts, as well as those who dwelt about Mount Pangaeum, were forced to join the armament, like those others of whom I spoke before, the dwellers along the coast being made to serve in the fleet, while those who lived more inland had to follow with the land forces. The road which the army of Xerxes took remains to this day untouched. The Thracians neither plough nor sow it, but hold it in great honour. At Acanthus, Xerxes separated from his fleet, bidding the captains sail on ahead and await his coming at Therma on the Thermaic Gulf, the place from which the bay takes its name. Through this town lay, he understood, his shortest road. Previously his order of march had been the following. From Doriscus to Acanthus, his land army had proceeded in 3 bodies, one of which took the way along the seashore in company with the fleet and was commanded by Mardonius and Mazistes, while another pursued an inland track under Tritantechmes and Gergis. The third, with which was Xerxes himself, marching midway between the other 2 and having for its leaders Smerdomenes and Megabitzus. The fleet, therefore, after leaving the king, sailed through the channel which had been cut for it by Mount Athos, and so at length they reached Therma, the appointed place, and came likewise to Sindus and Calestra upon the river Axius. So the fleet anchored off the Axius and off Therma, and the towns that lay between, waiting the king's coming. Xerxes, meanwhile, with his land force, left Acanthus and started for Therma, taking his way across the land. On reaching Therma, Xerxes halted his army, which encamped along the coast, beginning at the city of Therma in Mygdonia and stretching out as far as the rivers Lydius and Haliacmon, 2 streams which, mingling their waters in one, form the boundary between Botea and Macedonia. Such was the extent of country through which the barbarians encamped. King Xerxes had sent no heralds either to Athens or Sparta to ask tribute, for a reason which I will now relate. When Darius some time before sent messengers for the same purpose, they were thrown at Athens into the pit of punishment, at Sparta into a well, and bidden to take therefrom earth and water for themselves and carry it to their king. On this account Xerxes did not send to ask them. What calamity came upon the Athenians to punish them for their treatment of the heralds I cannot say, unless it were the laying waste of their city and territory, but that I believe was not on account of this crime. The expedition of the Persian king, though it was in name directed against Athens, threatened really the whole of Greece, and of this the Greeks were aware some time before. But they did not all view the matter in the same light. Some of them had given the Persian tribute, and were bold on this account, deeming themselves thereby secured against suffering hurt from the barbarian army, while others, who had refused compliance, were thrown into extreme alarm. For whereas they considered all the ships in Greece too few to engage the enemy, it was plain that the greater number of states would take no part in the war, but warmly favoured the Persians. And here I feel constrained to deliver an opinion, which most men I know will object to, but which, as it seems to me to be true, I am determined not to withhold. Had the Athenians, from fear of the approaching danger, quitted their country, or had they, without quitting it, submitted to the power of Xerxes, there would certainly have been no attempt to resist the Persians by sea. In which case the course of events by land would have been the following. Though the Peloponnesians might have carried ever so many breastworks across the isthmus, yet their allies would have fallen off from the Lacedaemonians, not by voluntary desertion, but because town after town must have been taken by the fleet of the barbarians. And so the Lacedaemonians would at last have stood alone, and standing alone would have displayed prodigies of valour and died nobly. Either they would have done thus, or else, before it came to that extremity, seeing one Greek state after another embrace the cause of the Persians, they would have come to terms with King Xerxes, and thus, either way, Greece would have been brought under Persia. If then a man should now say that the Athenians were the saviours of Greece, he would not exceed the truth, for they truly held the scales, and whichever side they espoused must have carried the day. They too it was who, when they had determined to maintain the freedom of Greece, roused up that portion of the Greek nation which had not gone over to the Persians, and so, next to the gods, they repulsed the invader. Even the terrible oracles which reached them from Delphi and struck fear into their hearts failed to persuade them to fly from Greece. They had the courage to remain faithful to their land and await the coming of the foe. When the Athenians, anxious to consult the oracle, sent their messengers to Delphi, hardly had the envoys completed the customary rites about the sacred precinct and taken their seats inside the sanctuary of the god, when the Pythoness Aristonika by name thus prophesied: "Wretches, why sit ye here? Fly, fly to the ends of creation, quitting your homes and the crags which your city crowns with her circlet. Neither the head nor the body is firm in its place, nor at bottom, firm the feet, nor the hands, nor resteth the middle uninjured, all ruined and lost. Since fire and impetuous Ares, speeding along in a Syrian chariot, haste to destroy her, not alone shalt thou suffer. Full many the towers he will level, many the shrines of the gods he will give to a fiery destruction. Even now they stand, with dark sweat horribly dripping, trembling and quaking for fear. And lo, from the high roofs trickleth black blood, sign prophetic of hard distresses impending. Get ye away from the temple, and brood on the ills that await ye." When the Athenian messengers heard this reply, they were filled with the deepest affliction. Whereupon Timon, the son of Androbulus, one of the men of most mark among the Delphians, seeing how utterly cast down they were at the gloomy prophecy, advised them to take an olive branch, and entering the sanctuary again, consult the oracle as suppliants. The Athenians followed this advice, and going in once more said, "O king, we pray thee reverence these boughs of supplication which we bear in our hands, and deliver to us something more comforting concerning our country. Else we will not leave thy sanctuary, but will stay here till we die." Upon this, the priestess gave them a second answer, which was the following: "Pallas has not been able to soften the Lord of Olympus, though she has often prayed him and urged him with excellent counsel. Yet once more I address thee in words than adamant firmer. When the foe shall have taken whatever the limit of Cecrops holds within it, and all which divine Cytheron shelters, then far-seeing Zeus grants this to the prayers of Athena: safe shall the wooden wall continue for thee and thy children. Wait not the tramp of the horse, nor the footman mightily moving over the land, but turn your back to the foe, and retire ye. Yet shall a day arrive when ye shall meet him in battle. Holy Salamis, thou shalt destroy the offspring of women, when men scatter the seed, or when they gather the harvest." This answer seemed, as indeed it was, gentler than the former one. So the envoys wrote it down and went back with it to Athens. When, however, upon their arrival, they produced it before the people, and inquiry began to be made into its true meaning, many and various were the interpretations which men put upon it. Two, more especially, seemed to be directly opposed to one another. Certain of the old men were of opinion that the god meant to tell them the citadel would escape, for this was anciently defended by a palisade, and they supposed that barrier to be the wooden wall of the oracle. Others maintained that the fleet was what the god pointed at, and their advice was that nothing should be thought of except the ships, which had best be at once got ready. Still, such as said the wooden wall meant the fleet were perplexed by the last two lines of the oracle. Holy Salamis, thou shalt destroy the offspring of women, when men scatter the seed, or when they gather the harvest. These words caused great disturbance amongst those who took the wooden wall to be the ships, since the interpreters understood them to mean that if they made preparations for a sea fight, they would suffer a defeat of Salamis. Now there was in Athens a man who had lately made his way into the first rank of citizens. His true name was Themistocles, but he was known more generally as the son of Neocles. This man came forward and said that the interpreters had not explained the oracle altogether aright. For if, he argued, the clause in question had really respected the Athenians, it would not have been expressed so mildly. The phrase used would have been luckless Salamis rather than holy Salamis, had those to whom the island belonged been about to perish in its neighbourhood. Rightly taken, the response of the god threatened the enemy much more than the Athenians. He therefore counselled his countrymen to make ready to fight on board their ships, since they were the wooden wall in which the god told them to trust. When Themistocles had thus cleared the matter, the Athenians embraced his view. Themistocles had before this given a counsel which prevailed very seasonably. The Athenians, having a large sum of money in their treasury, the produce of the mines of Laurium, were about to share it among the full-grown citizens, who would have received 10 drachmas apiece, when Themistocles persuaded them to forbear the distribution, and build with the money 200 ships to help them in their war against the Aeginetians. It was the breaking out of the Aeginetian War which was at this time the saving of Greece, for hereby were the Athenians forced to become a maritime power. The new ships were not used for the purpose for which they had been built, but became a help to Greece in her hour of need. And the Athenians had not only these vessels ready before the war, but they likewise set to work to build more, while they determined, in a council which was held after the debate upon the oracle, that, according to the advice of the god, they would embark their whole force aboard their ships, and with such Greeks as chose to join them, give battle to the barbarian invader. Such, then, were the oracles which had been received by the Athenians. The Greeks, who were well affected to the Grecian cause, having assembled in one place, and there consulted together and interchanged pledges with each other, agreed that before any other step was taken, the feuds and enmities which existed between the different nations should first of all be appeased. Many such there were, but one was of more importance than the rest, namely the war which was still going on between the Athenians and the Aeginetians. When this business was concluded, understanding that Xerxes had reached Sardis with his army, they resolved to dispatch spies into Asia to take note of the king's affairs. So when these resolutions had been agreed upon, and the quarrels between the states made up, first of all they sent into Asia 3 men as spies. These men reached Sardis and took note of the king's forces, but being discovered, were examined by order of the generals who commanded the land army, and having been condemned to suffer death, were led out to execution. Xerxes, however, when the news reached him, disapproving the sentence of the generals, sent some of his bodyguard with instructions, if they found the spies still alive, to bring them into his presence. The messengers found the spies alive and brought them before the king, who, when he heard the purpose for which they had come, gave orders to his guards to take them round the camp and show them all the footmen and all the horse, letting them gaze at everything to their heart's content. Then, when they were satisfied, to send them away unharmed to whatever country they desired. For these orders Xerxes gave afterwards the following reasons. Had the spies been put to death, he said, the Greeks would have continued ignorant of the vastness of his army, which surpassed the common report of it, while he would have done them a very small injury by killing 3 of their men. On the other hand, by the return of the spies to Greece, his power would have become known, and the Greeks, he expected, would make surrender of their freedom before he began his march, by which means his troops would be saved all the trouble of an expedition. So the spies, when they had seen everything, were dismissed and came back to Europe. The Greeks took counsel together and considered where they should fix the war and what places they should occupy. The opinion which prevailed was that they should guard the pass at Thermopylae, since it was narrower than the Thessalian defile, and at the same time nearer to them. Of the pathway by which the Greeks who fell at Thermopylae were intercepted they had no knowledge, until on their arrival at Thermopylae it was discovered to them by the Trachinians. This pass, then, it was determined they should guard, in order to prevent the barbarians from penetrating into Greece through it, and at the same time it was resolved that the fleet should proceed to Artemisium in the region of Herodotus. For as those places are near to one another, it will be easy for the fleet and army to hold communication. The 2 places may be thus described. Artemisium is where the Sea of Thrace contracts into a narrow channel, running between the isle of Skiathos and the mainland of Magnesia. When this narrow strait is passed, you come to the line of coast called Artemisium, which is a portion of Euboea and contains a temple of Artemis. As for the entrance into Greece by Trachis, it is at its narrowest point about 50 feet wide. This, however, is not the place where the passage is most contracted, for it is still narrower a little above and a little below Thermopylae. At Alpeni, which is lower down than that place, it is only wide enough for a single carriage, and up above, at the river Phoenix, near the town called Anthala, it is the same. West of Thermopylae rises a lofty and precipitous hill, impossible to climb, which runs up into the chain of Oeta, while to the east the road is shut in by the sea and by marshes. In this place are the warm springs, which the natives call the cauldrons, and above them stands an altar sacred to Heracles. A wall had once been carried across the opening, and in this there had of old times been a gateway. The old wall had been built in very remote times, and the greater part of it had gone to decay through age. Now, however, the Greeks resolved to repair its breaches, and here make their stand against the barbarian. At this point there is a village very near the road, Alpeni by name, from which the Greeks reckoned on getting corn for their troops. These places, therefore, seemed to the Greeks fit for their purpose. Weighing well all that was likely to happen, and considering that in this region the barbarians could make no use of their vast numbers, nor of their cavalry, they resolved to await here the invader of Greece. And when news reached them of the Persians being in Pieria, straightway they broke up from the isthmus, and proceeded, some on foot to Thermopylae, others by sea to Artemisium. The Greeks now made all speed to reach the 2 stations. And about the same time the Delphians, alarmed both for themselves and for their country, consulted the god, and received for answer a command to pray to the winds, for the winds would do Greece good service. So when this answer was given them, forthwith the Delphians sent word of the prophecy to those Greeks who were zealous for freedom, and cheering them thereby amid the fears which they entertained with respect to the barbarian, earned their everlasting gratitude. The fleet of Xerxes now departed from Therma. As far as this point then, and on land as far as Thermopylae, the armament of Xerxes had been free from mischance, and the numbers were still, according to my reckoning, of the following amount. The whole number of the land and sea forces added together amounts to 2,317,610 men. Such was the force brought from Asia, without including the camp followers or taking any account of the provision ships and the men whom they had on board. Such then was the amount of the entire host of Xerxes. As for the number of the women who ground the corn, of the concubines and the eunuchs, no one can give any sure account of it, nor can the baggage horses and the other sumpter beasts, nor the Indian hounds which follow the army be calculated by reason of their multitude. Hence I am not at all surprised that the waters of the rivers was found too scant for the army in some instances. Rather, it is a marvel to me how the provisions did not fail, when the numbers were so great. The fleet then, as I said, on leaving Therma, sailed to the Magnesian territory, and there occupied the strip of coast between the city of Casthanea and Cape Sepias. The ships of the first row were moored to the land, while the remainder swung at anchor further off. The beach extended but a very little way, so that they had to anchor off the shore, row upon row, 8 deep. In this manner they passed the night. But at dawn of day, calm and stillness gave way to a raging sea and a violent storm, which fell upon them with a strong gale from the east, a wind which the people in those parts called Hellespontius. Such of them as perceived the wind rising, and were so moored as to allow of it, forestalled the tempest by dragging their ships up on the beach, and in this way saved both themselves and their vessels. But the ships which the storm caught out at sea were driven ashore, some of them near the place called Ipne, or the Ovens, at the foot of Pelion, others on the strand itself, others again about Cape Sepias, while a portion were dashed to pieces near the cities of Melibea and Casthanea. There was no resisting the tempest. The Athenians declared that they had received aid from Boreas before, and that it was he who had now caused all these disasters. They therefore, on their return home, built a temple to this god on the banks of the Ilissus. Such as put the loss of the Persian fleet in this storm at the lowest say that 400 of their ships were destroyed, that a countless multitude of men were slain, and a vast treasure engulfed. As for the number of the provision craft and other merchant ships which perished, it was beyond count. Indeed, such was the loss that the commanders of the sea force, fearing lest in their shattered condition the Thessalians should venture on an attack, raised a lofty barricade around their station out of the wreck of the vessels cast ashore. The storm lasted 3 days. The scouts left by the Greeks about the highlands of Euboea hastened down from their stations on the day following that whereon the storm began, and acquainted their countrymen with all that had befallen the Persian fleet. These no sooner heard what had happened than straightway they returned thanks to Poseidon the Saviour, and poured libations in his honour, after which they hastened back with all speed to Artemisium, expecting to find a very few ships left to oppose them, and arriving there for the second time, took up their station on that strip of coast. Nor from that day to the present have they ceased to address Poseidon by the name then given him of Saviour. The barbarians, when the wind lulled and the sea grew smooth, drew their ships down to the water and proceeded to coast along the mainland. Having then rounded the extreme point of Magnesia, they sailed straight into the bay that runs up to Pegasi, to a place called Aphete. Here then it was that the fleet of Xerxes came to an anchor. 15 ships, which had lagged greatly behind the rest, happening to catch sight of the Greek fleet at Artemisium, mistook it for their own, and sailing down into the midst of it, fell into the hands of the enemy. Xerxes, meanwhile, with the land army, had proceeded through Thessaly and Achaea, and 3 days earlier had entered the territory of the Malians. King Xerxes pitched his camp in the region of Malis called Trachinia, while on their side the Greeks occupied the straits. These straits the Greeks in general called Thermopylae, the hot gates, but the natives and those who dwell in the neighbourhood call them Pili, the gates. Here then the two armies took their stand, the one master of all the region lying north of Trachis, the other of the country extending southward of that place to the verge of the continent. The Greeks, who at this spot awaited the coming of Xerxes, were the following: from Sparta, 300 men at arms; from Arcadia, 1,000 Tegeans and Mantineans, 500 of each people; 120 Orchomenians from the Arcadian Orchomenus, and 1,000 from other cities; from Corinth, 400 men; from Phlius, 200, and from Mycenae, 80. Such was the number from the Peloponnese. There were also present from Boeotia 700 Thespians and 400 Thebans.